I remember that evening so clearly, like a scene from a movie I've watched too many times. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar. My homemade pie was still warm, wrapped in foil with care. I added 2 slices of his favorite chocolate cake, the kind he always asked for on his birthday. Tucked between them was a note I had rewritten 5 times, trying to find the perfect balance between "I miss you" and "I love you." Daniel had been staying late at the office for weeks, and I told myself he was just stressed, overwhelmed. Still, something in me craved connection, or maybe I was chasing a version of us we hadn't been in a long time. I slipped on my coat, glanced in the mirror, and smiled. Not because I felt beautiful, but because I hoped this would make him smile. That was the point, really. I wasn't looking for grand gestures or apologies. I just wanted a small moment back, a shared bite of pie, a kiss on the cheek, a reminder that we still knew how to find each other in the mess. I got into the car with my heart tapping against my ribs like it knew something I didn't. The night was quiet, the streets nearly empty, and I imagined what he might say when he saw me. "You didn't have to do this," with that little grin that made everything feel all right. I pictured him leaning back in his chair, tired but grateful, pulling me into one of those long, safe hugs. I let my mind wander there, to the softness of it all. Because sometimes, when the heart aches, you wrap it in daydreams like a blanket. And that night, I was clinging to hope like it was all I had left. The office building looked different at night, colder somehow, all glass and silence. I parked in the visitor lot, grabbed the basket from the passenger seat, and took a deep breath before heading in. The night guard, a kind older man named Walter, gave me a familiar smile. "Bringing him a treat, huh?" he chuckled, holding the door open for me like he always did. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but my palms were sweating. "Just a little surprise," I said, hoping the crack in my voice wasn't as obvious as it felt. The elevator ride was quiet, just me and my thoughts echoing in that tiny space. I thought about how things used to be, how he'd bring me lunch when I was buried in deadlines, how we used to laugh in the car with the windows down and no destination. Somewhere along the way, life got heavy. Work, bills, routines. I kept wondering if love always had to grow quieter with time, or if maybe we'd just stopped listening. Tonight, I was trying to speak louder, with pie and cake and one small note. As I stepped into the hallway, the familiar hum of overhead lights buzzed softly above me. His office was near the end, that same door I used to wait outside of when we'd meet for dinner. I could almost hear his laugh, the way it used to be before the late nights became normal, and the kisses goodbye turned into distracted nods. I walked slowly, balancing the basket, heart thudding. I wanted to believe this would mean something, that he'd see it for what it was. Not dessert, but an offering, a plea for us. I paused just outside his office door, adjusting the strap of my purse and smoothing my hair with one hand. My other hand held tight to the basket, like it was holding me together. I could hear the soft hum of his desk lamp, the faint clicking of a keyboard, maybe even his voice on a call. I smiled to myself. This was the moment, the surprise. I imagined him looking up, tired eyes softening when he saw me. "Jess," he'd say, surprised but touched. That's what I was chasing, that flicker of warmth we used to live inside. But instead of knocking, I stood there for a second longer. Something in me hesitated, a whisper I couldn't quite hear, a heaviness in the air I couldn't name. I adjusted the note inside the basket one last time, making sure it sat just right. It read, "You're still my favorite part of every day." I almost laughed at how cheesy it sounded now, how vulnerable it felt. But that was the thing about love, wasn't it? You had to be a little brave, a little foolish. I lifted my hand toward the doorknob, heart brimming with hope. And just as I reached for it, something made me freeze. A sound. Soft. Breathy. Laughter. A woman's laugh. Then a voice, low and familiar, murmuring something I couldn't make out. My fingers hovered in the air, trembling. I leaned closer, barely breathing. Through the crack in the door, a sliver of light poured out. And what I saw on the other side? That changed everything. At first, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. It felt like I'd walked into the wrong scene, like my eyes had betrayed me. Or maybe I was dreaming. Daniel's back was turned to me, but I knew that silhouette like my own reflection. And the woman in his arms? Her laughter had stopped. Her head was tilted up toward him, lips parted in a way no wife should ever have to see. My hands, still holding the basket, went numb. Everything inside me went painfully, brutally quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. The note I'd written, the pie I'd baked, the pieces of my heart, they all slipped from my fingers and hit the floor like broken glass. I watched from the hallway, frozen in place, as Olivia, his secretary, touched his face like she belonged there. And Daniel? He kissed her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I didn't exist. I backed away one step, then another, as if retreating could somehow undo what I'd just seen. My chest burned, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. Rage had started bubbling up through the numbness, like fire under ice. I turned and walked out without saying a word, my footsteps slow and steady, as if I were afraid I might explode if I moved too fast. Walter, the guard, smiled again when I passed by. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I felt like a ghost, hovering in my own life, watching everything unravel. And as I stepped into the cold night air, one truth settled over me like a storm cloud. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. The ride home was a blur. I don't remember the turns I took, the red lights I stopped at, or the songs playing on the radio. I just remember gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Every breath hurt. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, dull, soul-deep ache. I kept hearing that laugh. Hers. Over and over again, like it had been stitched into my memory in permanent thread. I thought of all the nights he'd texted, "Working late, babe," and how easily I'd believed him. When I got home, the silence swallowed me whole. The lights were still on from when I left, my half-drunk tea sitting cold on the counter. The house looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I sank into the couch, coat still on, shoes still wet from the pavement. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, bitter, relentless. Not because he cheated, but because I had loved him so fully. So blindly. And I realized then that he had walked away from something real for, what? A thrill? An ego stroke? But the sadness didn't last long, because something else had started to rise up inside me. Something darker, sharper. Rage. And not the kind that burns out quick. No. This was a quiet kind of fury, the kind that plans, that calculates, that waits. I wiped my tears and sat up straighter, breathing in the bitterness and letting it settle. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't scream. I'd think. And then I'd make damn sure they both remembered who I was. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the second slice of cake still sitting on the counter. Untouched, innocent. I picked it up slowly, ran my thumb along the edge of the plate, and then dropped it straight into the trash. There was no poetry left in that cake, no sweetness in any of it, just crumbs. Crumbs of who I had been. And that woman, the one who baked pies and wrote notes and hoped her husband would come home with a kiss, she died the moment that office door cracked open. But something else was born in her place. Not a monster, no. I wasn't about to turn into someone bitter or cruel. But I was about to become someone with teeth, someone who didn't just take the hit and crawl away. I sat down with a pen and paper, not to write another note, but to make a list. My hand was steady now. No more trembling. No more hoping. Just clarity. I would give him one final gift, not wrapped in foil or tied with a ribbon. This one would be cold, calculated, and unforgettable. Because if Daniel thought that moment in the office was the end of the story, he was wrong. It was just the crack that split the ground open. What came next would be the real shock. And I already knew exactly how it would start. Sleep never came that night. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of answer. But I didn't want comfort anymore. I wanted control. By morning, my tears had dried into something solid, something focused. I opened Daniel's laptop, the one he forgot to log out of before leaving for work, and started digging. Emails, messages, calendar events that didn't quite add up. It was all there, waiting, like breadcrumbs he'd never expected anyone to follow. I didn't just want proof. I wanted a pattern. I mapped out dates and times, hotel bookings tucked under vague client dinners, texts that read like they came from a romance novel no one should be living while married. He had been so careless, so smug. And Olivia? She wasn't innocent either. I found her messages too, always sent after hours, always signed with little hearts. I read everyone. Not to torture myself, but to sharpen my strategy. And slowly, a plan began to take shape, clear as glass and twice as dangerous. By the third cup of coffee, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I wanted it to sting. To echo. That's when I thought of Olivia's husband. A man I'd met only once, at some company picnic, quiet and polite. The kind of man who looked like he still believed in honesty. I tracked him down through a shared address in an email thread. Then I sent him a message. Just one line. We should talk. I think we've both been sleeping next to strangers. He replied within the hour. His name was Aaron. The message was short, cautious, but something in it told me he already knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to feel the tremble under his feet. We met that afternoon at a cafe just far enough from the office, the kind of place where no one asked questions. When he walked in, I recognized the same look I'd worn in the mirror the night before. Hollowed-out shock, barely hiding the storm beneath. We didn't exchange small talk. There was no need. I slid a manila folder across the table. He didn't open it right away, just looked at me, jaw tense, eyes heavy. Thank you, he said quietly, and I understood it wasn't gratitude. It was grief. Then he flipped it open and saw what I'd collected. Printed screenshots, overlapping calendars, images I never wanted to see again. He didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like this was the final confirmation of something he'd been trying not to believe. And then he asked the same question I'd been circling for hours. What do we do now? I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I told him calmly that they didn't deserve privacy, not after the way they'd violated our trust in the shadows. I wanted this to be public, not dramatic, not petty, visible. Corporate policy was clear. No undisclosed relationships, especially between manager and subordinate. I had the handbook saved on my desktop. Aaron agreed. They won't see it coming, he said, voice low and steady. I nodded. Exactly. And that's when we began building the perfect reveal. The days that followed felt different. I wasn't waiting around anymore, hoping he'd come home with some pathetic excuse. I had purpose now. Every free moment was spent organizing, refining, preparing. Aaron and I shared information quietly, like co-conspirators in a silent war. We combed through office chatter, policy memos, even social media breadcrumbs. It was astonishing how reckless they had been. Lunch breaks that lined up too often, business trips that mysteriously overlapped, whispers from coworkers that suddenly made perfect sense. At night, I would lie in bed, phone in hand, going over the timeline one more time. I wasn't obsessing. I was orchestrating. And in those hours, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the loud, ego-driven kind. This was quieter, cleaner. I wasn't broken anymore. I was building something. A reckoning. And the thought of Daniel standing there, blindsided and speechless, gave me just enough warmth to sleep soundly for the first time in weeks. The final detail fell into place when the company announced their annual gala, a celebration of milestones, of family values, and leadership excellence. It was perfect. A stage, an audience, and both of them dressed to impress. I RSVP'd with a smile and picked out a dress that made me feel like the woman I used to be. Before lies, before silence, before betrayal. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reminder of who I am, and exactly what I'm capable of when pushed too far. The night of the gala arrived like a performance I'd been rehearsing in my mind for days. The venue was glowing, chandeliers, soft jazz, glasses clinking, polite laughter echoing through the hall. I stepped out of the car and into the cool air, heels clicking on the pavement, heart steady. My dress shimmered under the lights, tailored just enough to remind Daniel what he'd lost, and what he'd underestimated. As I walked in, heads turned. Not because of the dress, really, but because I looked unshaken, controlled, radiant. Daniel didn't see me right away. He was near the stage, playing the charming executive, arm draped casually around Olivia's lower back. She looked exactly like someone who believed she'd gotten away with something. They both did. I smiled at that, not bitterly, but knowingly. Because tonight, I wasn't just his wife. I was the storm they didn't bother to check the forecast for. I greeted a few familiar faces, all of them commenting on how lovely I looked. "You're glowing," someone said. If only they knew why. I waited patiently through the speeches, the toasts, the polite pats on the back. My moment was coming, and I wasn't about to rush it. When Daniel saw me from across the room, his smile faltered just slightly. Olivia turned too, her hand still on his arm. I raised my glass in their direction. Not a toast, a signal. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to set the stage on fire. And when the microphone was offered for a few words from the executive's wife, I stepped forward with a warmth they didn't yet know was laced with gasoline. I took the microphone with a practiced smile, the kind that looks soft on the surface but hides steel underneath. The room was hushed, polite, waiting. I scanned the crowd, pausing just long enough on Daniel's face to let him know. This wasn't going to be the toast he expected. "Good evening," I began, voice calm, almost gentle. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but when you're married to someone as dedicated as Daniel, sometimes you feel inspired to bring a little something sweet. There was a murmur of laughter, light and unsuspecting. I turned slightly toward him. "Daniel, I brought you something, just like last week. Except this time." I reached into my clutch and pressed a button on the small remote hidden inside. "It's not cake?" Behind me, the screen on stage lit up, and silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Image after image appeared. Hotel entrances, kisses behind office doors, texts that read, "She'll never know." The slideshow moved slowly, deliberately. No need to rush. Gasps echoed through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a glass. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him as his face drained of color, his mouth parting like he wanted to form words and couldn't. Olivia beside him was already trembling, reaching out to steady herself. And right on cue, the ballroom doors opened, and there was Aaron. Dressed sharp, jaw clenched, holding up printed emails like evidence in a courtroom. His eyes met mine. A nod. Just one. The truth was out, and there was no crawling back from it. No one moved for a moment. It was the kind of silence that holds weight, the stunned, suffocating quiet before reputations crumble. Daniel stood there, still frozen, blinking as if he could somehow erase what everyone had just seen. Olivia's hands were shaking. Her boss, her colleagues, even her friends from HR stared in horror, no one coming to her defense. I stepped down from the stage slowly, heels tapping like punctuation. I didn't need to scream. The images had already said everything. I passed Daniel as I walked off, and for a second, he tried to speak. A whisper of my name like it still belonged to him. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. He had lost the right to my attention the second he gave it to someone else behind a locked door. Olivia turned away, burying her face in her hands. Aaron stood a few feet back, arms folded, watching it all unfold with the same stillness I felt inside. We had done what we came to do, not for vengeance, for truth, for clarity, for closure. By the time I reached the exit, the buzz behind me had turned into chaos. Whispers, gasps, people pulling out their phones, eyes darting between the stage and the accused. But I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The masks were off. The damage was done. And what I left behind in that ballroom wasn't just a broken man and a scandal. I left behind a chapter, a version of myself who stayed silent. She was gone. What came next? That was mine to write. The morning after the gala, the headlines in Daniel's office inbox spoke louder than any apology ever could. Executive under review. Internal breach of conduct. Possible termination pending. HR didn't waste time. Olivia was escorted out before lunch, her badge deactivated, her email erased. Daniel was placed on leave. Indefinitely. Suddenly, all those long nights at the office didn't look so noble anymore. The same people who once admired him now avoided his gaze in the hallways, as if betrayal might be contagious. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with bitterness, but with a strange calm. I wasn't proud of what happened. But I wasn't ashamed of it either. He made choices. I simply removed the curtain. The whispers didn't scare me. The judgment didn't touch me. If anything, there was a quiet strength in the way I carried myself through it. Not as a woman scorned, but as a woman done being dismissed. I filed for divorce the next day. No screaming, no theatrics, just signatures and silence. Daniel tried to call. Once. Twice. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. I had nothing left to say to a man who only listened when the whole room was watching. I didn't need closure. I had truth. And with that truth came freedom. Legal counsel took care of the rest. What I was owed, I claimed. The house, the car, the accounts he never thought I'd touch. I didn't take it out of spite. I took it because I deserved it, because he forgot who I was. And I just reminded him. People always assume you'll fall apart after something like that you'll crawl into bed and stay there for weeks, crying over what used to be. But grief doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it shows up in the grocery store aisle when you realize you don't need to buy his favorite cereal anymore. Sometimes it's in the quiet of your living room, noticing how much more peaceful the house feels without his phone buzzing at midnight. And sometimes it's just relief that he's gone. I began reclaiming the little things first. Playlists, pillows, passwords. I repainted the bedroom, donated his old books, threw out the mug he always left by the sink. It wasn't anger that fueled me. It was clarity. Every drawer I emptied, every closet I cleared, felt like I was making space. For breath. For light. For me. The woman who had stayed too quiet for too long was finally letting herself be loud, even if only in the privacy of her own home. And that silence? It didn't ache anymore. It healed. I met friends for lunch again, started saying yes to things I used to turn down. I even signed up for a baking class, not because I needed to learn, but because I wanted to share something I loved without anyone taking it for granted. The instructor smiled when I walked in, and for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled back without faking it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that more than any revenge or settlement was the sweetest part of all. A few weeks later, I found myself at a little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with good coffee and a window seat I used to daydream in. I sat across from my best friend, a slice of chocolate cake in front of me, the kind I used to bake for him. But this time, it wasn't for anyone else. Just me. She raised her eyebrows with a grin. "Dessert before lunch?" she asked. I smiled as I took the first bite. "I've earned it," I said. And I meant it. There was something poetic about it all. How the story that started with a pie ended with a piece of cake. Not because I needed sweetness, but because I had taken back the meaning of it. I wasn't mourning anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology or some miracle of closure. I had already walked through the fire and come out clean. Lighter, stronger, and more certain than ever that love, real love, starts with loving yourself enough not to settle for crumbs. I looked out the window as the world passed by, feeling no rush, no ache, no unfinished business. Just peace. I leaned back in my chair, took another bite, and laughed softly to myself. He always thought I was just the woman who brought dessert. What he never realized, what she never saw coming, is that I was also the woman who brought the reckoning.